Hey people, it's Scion Vibes, and you know what time it is. It's time for breaking the backlog for August 2021. This was another smaller month, as I had a few big games to play that were newer, and a few of the games I did play weren't exactly on my backlog, so I'm not going to be counting them. Anyways, I did get a few checked off still, so here we go. The first game was Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney Justice for All. At a glance, it's basically the same game as the first one, but there are a few changes here. The structure of the game is basically identical, with Phoenix taking on a few cases where some poor soul gets dead and it's up to him to prove his client not guilty. The biggest change comes in the form of Pearl Faye, Maya's cousin, who joins up with Phoenix and Maya after the second case. Pearl gives Phoenix a new investigation option, being able to see when people are lying and break their psych locks to get at the truth. Aside from that, it's basically the same, and the draw, like the first game, comes from the cases and the characters. I think I like the cases here more overall. There's some wacky situations, but it still feels fairly grounded, and the solutions feel reasonable. The new characters like Francisca von Karma are great too, fit right in, and make the game really fun to go through. Of the trilogy, this is probably my favorite. On that note, after Justice for All, I went right into the final game of the original Ace Attorney trilogy, Trials and Tribulations. I don't really have that much to say about it, honestly. It's kind of just a slightly worse version of Justice for All. Mechanically, it is identical, but the cases themselves go a bit too far into unbelievability at times. There were multiple times throughout the game where I was disappointed at how crazy a case went while still sticking firmly to the same case structure that the last few games had. One thing this game does is try to wrap up the Phoenix Wright Mia Fey storyline by having 3 of the 5 cases focus on it in some way. As I was going through it, I was a little wary of this because I didn't really think it needed that much focus, but to its credit, the last case did a really good job of wrapping up everything very nicely, and yeah, I think that case justifies the focus overall. That being said, I don't think it does enough to recover from the other 2 cases, which are just a little bit less interesting, more shark-jumpy cases than anything that's come before it. Third in August was Code Vein. I've had this for a while and was really interested knowing what type of game it was and how divided the reception to it was. After playing it, I can say with absolute confidence that the division was completely warranted. Okay, so at the risk of sounding really cliche with my comparisons, Code Vein is basically anime Dark Souls. Now, I adore Dark Souls, so I was basically on board from the get-go, but I didn't really get a chance to play it until recently when I did a co-op playthrough with a friend of mine. It has a few pretty interesting ideas and does do a lot differently that sets it apart, but man, is it just janky all the way through. The fact that stats are tied to equipment and different classes makes changing your build really easy, but if you're doing just a standard strength or dexterity build, you get the best one for that early on, and there's very little reason to change aside from unlocking a few skills that are tied to some others. Changing attack direction mid-combo is harder than it should be, and it's made harder by bosses that have auto-targeting, ironically making hitting them much harder. Detection for things like backstab and parries are really weird too, and often are just a coin flip on whether or not they're going to work. The bosses are mostly fine, the difficulty curve is all over the place, but there were a couple of really good fights in there. Admittedly, there were some awful ones too. The level design is where I stop having anything good to say, though. The earlier stages are fine, I suppose. There's nothing there that's like worse than the worst of the Souls games, you know what I mean? But later areas just get so tedious. It seems like they looked at Dark Souls' level design and thought that all that mattered was just being a big maze. So some of these levels end up being enormous, horrible mazes that are no fun to go through at all. And the story, which is something that similar games usually limit, is bloated and wordy to the point of just being really boring. There's some cool concepts, and the world isn't a particularly dull one, but man, when your cutscenes get to be Metal Gear Solid 4 length, that's a bit of a problem. There are some other things that bug me, but that's the majority of it. Despite all I said though, I did actually have fun with it, and I'm glad I played it. Probably won't be going back for a second run anytime soon though, if at all. And lastly in August was Proteus. I'm not really sure what to say about this one. It's less of a traditional game and more of an exploratory Zen experience. All you really do is walk around the island finding interesting things and eventually complete a few small objectives that change the seasons, which really just changes how things look. The visual style is great, basically being a 3D Atari 2600 game, and the musical score that goes with it is also fantastic. But that's really all I have to say about it. It's like an hour long, and aside from walking around the island taking in the sights and sounds, there isn't much to it. And that was breaking the backlog for August of 2021. Another short month, 3 or 4 games depending on how you'd categorize Proteus. Hopefully I'll get more done in September, as there's nothing new coming out until like the second week of October. Anyways, here's the rankings for this month, and here's how things look overall for the year. Nothing broke into the top 10 this month, so we'll have to see what September brings. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all later.